They thought humiliating her in front of 200 students would break her, but they didn't know they had just awakened someone far stronger, far smarter, and far more determined than any bully in that school. What she did next didn't just silence them, it changed the entire school forever. Stay with me for this gripping story, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful real-life transformations. The slap echoed through the courtyard like a gunshot, sharp enough to make every head whip around, sharp enough to freeze 200 students in stunned silence, sharp enough to make even the bullies themselves flinch for a heartbeat before their sneers returned. But for 16-year-old Mira Dalton, the shock didn't come from the sting on her cheek. It came from the sudden realization that she had allowed herself to stay silent far too long, and this moment, this humiliation in front of half the school, was no longer a wound but a turning point. She stood there, books scattered across the concrete, her glasses cracked, her breath trembling, the trio of bullies, Kara, Jenna, and Reese, towering over her with the smugness of people who believed they owned the world. Kara flicked Myra's notebook with her shoe, sending papers flying as she laughed and shouted, "Say something. Cry, run, do what you always do." And the crowd, unsure how to react, hovered between sympathy, fear, and morbid curiosity. But Mira did none of the above. She simply looked up, eyes no longer watery but steady and calm, and for the first time, the bullies faltered, not because she threatened them, not because she screamed, but because she acted like she wasn't afraid of them at all. That single shift unsettled them more than any retaliation could have. Mira picked up her cracked glasses, placed them back on her face, wiped the blood on her lip with the back of her hand, and said in a quiet voice that somehow carried across the courtyard, "You just made the biggest mistake of your lives." The whispers began instantly, students murmuring that Mira had finally snapped, that she would either end up crying in the bathroom or in the principal's office, but what none of them knew, not even Mira until that exact second, was that she had no intention of retreating. Instead, she walked away with a strange clarity in her chest, a clarity that felt almost like purpose. For years she had stayed invisible, surviving school by shrinking into the background, letting teachers overlook her, letting classmates forget she existed, letting bullies bruise her ego and sometimes her body while she told herself to endure it because it would eventually end. But she realized now that endings don't just happen, they're made, and she was finally ready to make one. That afternoon, Mira went home and sat in her room, staring at her reflection. Her cheek was swollen, her lip was split, her glasses were ruined. But beneath all that, she saw something fierce, something awakening. She didn't want pity, she wanted change, and she knew exactly where to start. Instead of going to her mother, or the principal, or even her best friend, she opened her laptop and pulled up every piece of evidence she'd quietly gathered over the years. Photos, videos, screenshots, audio recordings. She had never planned on using them, she had collected them as a strange coping mechanism, proof to herself that she wasn't imagining the cruelty. But now, it was going to become her arsenal. She stitched everything together into a single undeniable file, a digital record of the bullying culture that the school insisted didn't exist. Not just her bullies, not just her grade, the entire toxic ecosystem. She wrote a detailed report, attaching timestamps, teachers' dismissive responses, and the school's past failures to intervene. And then, with steady hands, she sent it to every teacher, every administrator, every parent email list, the school board, and the local newspaper. Within minutes, chaos erupted. But Mira wasn't finished. The next morning, she walked into school with her head high, not because she felt brave, but because the truth gave her strength she never had before. Students stared at her not with mockery but with shock, some even with respect. Teachers whispered. The principal looked frantic. Kara, Jenna, and Reese approached her with forced confidence, but Mira could see the fear behind their eyes. Their faces were pale, their hands shook. They were cornered animals pretending not to be trapped. Kara hissed, "What did you do?" And Mira simply replied, "I stopped being quiet." Before they could respond, they were summoned to the office, and over the course of the morning, so were half a dozen other bullies, teachers who ignored complaints, and even a coach who had dismissed bullying as character building. Parents arrived, board members arrived, news vans arrived. The school that had always told students to keep problems in-house was now the center of a public scandal. And Mira watched it all unfold with a calm she didn't know she was capable of. But the turning point wasn't the drama, it was when several students she'd never spoken to quietly approached her to thank her. Some were victims of the same bullies. Some had been silent witnesses who felt guilty. Some had been bullies themselves who didn't know how to stop. A movement was forming, and Mira had ignited it. By the end of the week, a formal anti-bullying task force was created. Staff were disciplined or fired. Policies were rewritten. Anonymous reporting systems were installed. And Mira, once invisible, was asked to join the student advisory board to help shape the new culture. The bullies were suspended and required to attend counseling. Their parents were furious, but no one cared anymore. Justice had shifted, but the biggest twist came when Kara, the worst of them, approached Mira weeks later, not with hostility, but with tears in her eyes. She confessed that she had been abused at home, that she took her pain out on others because she never learned another way to exist, that Mira's stand had forced her to confront the truth she'd been running from her entire life. Mira didn't forgive her instantly, but she listened. And that act, listening, changed both of them. The school transformed, not because of punishment alone, but because Mira chose courage over silence, truth over fear, and leadership over victimhood. The girl who was slapped in front of 200 students became the student who changed the entire system. Her retaliation wasn't violence, it wasn't humiliation, it was power, the kind earned, not taken. And everyone who witnessed her transformation learned something priceless. Sometimes the quietest person in the room carries the loudest strength, and when they rise, the world has no choice but to rise with them.